9. Kola Peninsula. On the Kola Peninsula, in Russia's extreme northwest, there's a Soviet-era submarine graveyard that's been forgotten about until recent years. The subs sit in a restricted zone that's connected to an active naval base. The Soviets dumped them there in the 70s and forgot about them. The Soviet Navy was struggling to keep up with orders for new warships, and getting rid of the decommissioned subs wasn't a priority. Some of the outdated subs supposedly sank after the military used them for target practice. They just left the rest there to decay. Over the years, oil and rust leaked into the water and polluted the environment. It took a while, but the authorities eventually acknowledged that the mess was only getting worse and that it needed to be cleaned up. They burned at least one submarine as part of the cleanup effort. They dismantled others, removed them from the water, and recycled them. Some were in good enough condition to be used as training vessels, and one ended up on display at a museum. Based on satellite images captured in 2007, it looks like there could be at least 7 submarines still sitting in the water that are beyond saving. 8. Red Star Train Graveyard. The Hungarian rail network built the Istvántelek train yard, now known as the Red Star Train Graveyard, during the early 20th century. The country's rail fleet was snowballing. They designed and built the yard to perform maintenance and repairs on the growing fleet. It ended up doubling as a scrapyard when diesel engines began replacing locomotives. Outdated equipment piled up at the property, where much of it remains today. There are over 100 train cars and locomotives at the Red Star Graveyard. Some of them have extremely rare engines. The Nazis reportedly used some of the other trains for transporting prisoners to Auschwitz when they occupied Hungary during World War II. There are also many Soviet-era trains parked in the yard. Only a few parts of the site are still in active use today. Mostly, the Hungarians have abandoned and forgotten the graveyard. This is even though the train cars have connections to major historical chapters and events. Many people believe that the aging, obsolete equipment is worth saving. At one point, the government slated some cars to be moved to a local museum for display, but this never happened, and the museum ended up closing. Because of a lack of funding, they made no alternative plans for the cars. They continue to rot at the graveyard with an uncertain future. Nobody will probably ever restore them. 7. Gorilovo Air Base. The Soviets built Gorilovo Air Base in 1938 outside the Russian city of St. Petersburg. It was originally a Soviet Air Force base that housed military aircraft and plane parts. It was also home to several regiments, as well as an aircraft repair facility. The military stopped using the site when the Soviet Union fell. It's still partially in use today as an aircraft repair center and an airfield for small planes. It also functions as the headquarters for a local flight school. But the site is littered with evidence of its military past, including a closed-off section of runway that contains a helicopter graveyard. The decommissioned choppers began appearing during the 90s and have sat neglected ever since. They're continuing to fall apart as time passes. Several administration buildings are no longer used, along with 2 abandoned radio towers and a weather station. Nobody's bothered to maintain the vehicles or buildings, yet the property owner stations guards at the site to prevent trespassers from snooping around or stealing scrap metal. The repair shop may be keeping the helicopters for their parts, despite their sad state. 6. The Boneyard. The world's largest aircraft graveyard is at the Davis-Monthan U.S. Air Force Base outside Tucson in Arizona. Nicknamed the Boneyard, the sprawling 1,200-acre is home to over 4,400 decommissioned aircraft. The military chose it for its dry climate, which helps to slow down the inevitable rusting process. There are planes from all over the world at the Boneyard, and many of them have been there for years or even decades. Hardly anybody used the planes before they were put into storage. And while this may seem like a tremendous waste, someone will recycle or bring most of the vehicles back to life. They're simply waiting until they're needed. Some planes are broken down for their parts, which are shipped out and reused. Others are maintained, so they're ready to take to the skies again on short notice. Davis-Monthan is home to countless different models of aircraft, including a collection of decommissioned B-52 bombers that are in storage. The military removed their wings as part of a strategic arms limitation treaty between the US and the Soviet Union. They deliberately positioned the planes so that Soviet satellites could see from overhead that they'd removed the wings as promised. Some of the fighter jets at the Boneyard including the F-4 Phantom II and the F-16, are being converted into aerial target drones. There's a lot more to storing a plane than simply parking it and letting it become an afterthought. Crews drain the fuel from every plane that arrives at the boneyard. Then they flush out its fuel tank and lines with light oil to keep them lubricated. If a plane served on an aircraft carrier, it needs to be washed to avoid corrosion from exposure to sea salt. They removed all explosive devices from the planes, covered small openings with tape, and sprayed the aircraft with several coats of easily removable paint. This helps to keep it as cool as possible and protect it from the harsh desert sun. Unfortunately, Davis-Monthan is not open to the public, being an active military site and all. There used to be bus tours, but they've been suspended indefinitely at the request of the Air Force. 5. Thessaloniki Train Cemetery. On the outskirts of Greece's second largest city, Thessaloniki, there's a growing collection of disused trains. The country's national railway, known as the Hellenic Railways Organization, left them behind. The rusting cars accumulated during the 1980s. Now there are over 1,000 of them on the property. They've become a popular attraction among urban explorers, but sadly serve no practical purpose. The companies repeatedly tried to sell the cars as scrap, but these attempts were unsuccessful. Very few honest business owners seem interested in associating with the site, which has a reputation for scrap smuggling and other dishonest dealings. Many rail enthusiasts have argued that some trains aren't worth scrapping, and they'd be better off being preserved for their historical value. And it's true, the yard contains some remarkable vintage train cars, including 19th century wagons that once traveled between Thessaloniki and Istanbul. There are also units that the Nazis seized as World War II trophies, according to photographer Nikki Panu, who spotted the ill-gotten train cars during a visit to the site. On her website, Panu echoed the sentiments of those who think it's a shame that they've left vintage train cars to rot. They're unguarded and at the mercy of vandals who've dismantled them and stolen parts for scrap. She described the weapons as lost pieces of heritage. She further pointed out that it's unfortunately too late to save many of them. What do you think could be a great way to use an abandoned train cart? Let us know in the comments, and remember to subscribe for more great videos from the channel. 4. Nagy Gyamut Aircraft Graveyard. Outside the tiny Hungarian village of Nagy Gyamut, there's a small aircraft cemetery. It has an abandoned runway and over 30 decommissioned military planes from bygone eras. The military built it during the 1930s as an airbase. It's near the modern-day Papa military base. In 1945, the Soviet Union took control of the now deserted site. It continued to operate until the military took the last of its planes out of service in 1997. Some found new homes at museums or were sold to collectors. Others have remained parked at the defunct base ever since it closed. Crews filled their fuel tanks with cement to prevent anyone from coming along and trying to fly them. The site maintained a military presence until 2001, when all remaining personnel left. Today, there are 5 decommissioned Sukhoi Su-22 fighter jets and 29 Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-21s at the site. Developed by the Soviet Union, these planes were famous for their top-notch fighting capabilities. Many countries have relied on them since the Soviets introduced them in the 1960s. During their heyday, the jets were especially popular among the Eastern Bloc countries, with the Hungarian military employing over 250 MiG-21s at one point. Sadly, the aircraft at the abandoned property are sinking into the mud from the weight of the cement inside their tanks, and scavengers in search of scrap metal have dismantled the historic decaying jets, piece by piece. 3. RAF Fokingham. The British Royal Air Force opened the Fokingham base in Lincolnshire, England in 1940. It served primarily as a troop carrier airfield, and both British and American forces used the base. During the Cold War, the property functioned as a missile base. When RAF Fokingham closed down in 1963, the military left hundreds of vehicles they used during wartime at the site. They included trucks, boats, amphibious vehicles, and construction and farming machines. As time passed, the rotting equipment became overgrown with plants and covered in rust and peeling paint. Shortly after the base closed, the military sold the property to a private buyer for agricultural use. But the new owner left the vehicles untouched as they fell further into disrepair. In 2013, Mail Online reported that the current owners stored the machines so they could sell them for scrap parts. Today, the field remains littered with decaying equipment. 2. Ferropolis. At the end of World War II, France, Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union divided Germany up. They drew a line through the country, splitting it up into the Communist East and Capitalist West Germany. East Germany fell under strict Soviet control. Formerly known as the German Democratic Republic, East Germany was closed off from the outside world for most people who lived there. And the East Germans didn't allow anyone from outside the Berlin Wall into the country. Germany reunified in 1990, finally giving citizens of countries outside the Eastern Bloc a chance to see what went on in East Germany during the decades-long division. And while a lot of what they saw was depressing, some sites were fascinating. For example, there's a former East German coal mine in the country's northeastern region. Known as Ferropolis, it's home to 5 massive bucket excavators that were left behind when the site closed in 1991. The East Germans abandoned the equipment because it was easier and cheaper to desert it than it would have been to move or dismantle it. It probably creates a problem leaving such gargantuan machinery lying around. But the government had bigger tasks at hand, like restructuring its economy and finding jobs for its unemployed masses. Soon enough, the excavators attracted visitors, and it continues to function as an open-air museum today. It's thought to be the world's biggest collection of abandoned industrial diggers, with each machine weighing up to 2,000 tons, 1,814 metric tons. The oldest digger, nicknamed the Mosquito, was built in 1941. Between 3 and 5 operators were required to run this 223 by 92 foot, 68 by 28 meter monster. It took the same amount of people to run a 263 foot wide, 80 meter wide excavator known as Mad Max, which dates back to 1952. Both the Mosquito and Mad Max are small compared to the 328 foot, 100 meter Medusa, which required 5 to 7 operators. But the site's largest machine, the 410 foot long, 125 meter Gemini, dwarfed even the Medusa. Built in 1958, a 6 to 8 person crew was required to control the monster. The 102 by 246 foot, 31 by 75 meters big wheel is the newest digger. It was built in 1984 and requires 3 to 5 operators. Nobody's used the machine since mining closed, and they are legally protected. In 1995, the site officially opened as Ferropolis, giving the public a chance to see the gigantic diggers up close. 1. Częstochowa Train Graveyard. During Poland's communist era, Częstochowa was one of the country's leading industrial and educational centers. It's become a popular tourist attraction and is also still an industrial hub, thanks to the establishment of the Katowice Special Economic Zone. The zone offers business owners incentives for setting up their headquarters there. But times have changed, and this is clear in the left-behind remnants of the city's past, including an abandoned train depot that's seen much busier days. At its peak, the station functioned as a vital link between the historic Warsaw-Vienna Railway and the rest of Europe. But it lost its use over the years, as 6 more rail stations opened throughout Częstochowa. The depot eventually closed because it was no longer needed. Today, the disused property is only a train graveyard. It also offers a storage facility for an eerie collection of aging rail cars that are no longer used. Częstochowa's landscape has changed a lot since the station's heyday. But the city of 240,000 is still lively and has a lot going for it, and its future is promising. It's here that crumbling historical ruins coexist alongside the fast-paced day-to-day happenings of modern urban life. And this stark contrast between the past and present might explain why urban explorers can't seem to agree on whether the station is a true train graveyard or a neglected part of a larger depot. Technicalities aside, the property is fascinating and attracts many off-the-beaten-path explorers who are hoping to glimpse firsthand a bygone era. If you could keep it, would you rather find an abandoned vintage car or an abandoned small airplane? Share your answer in the comments below, and remember to hit the subscribe button for more outstanding videos. See you again soon. Bye.